So tonight we have a great presentation from our one of our RISE members, Tyler Booth. I will let him introduce himself because he really didn't give me a whole lot to go off of other than the fact that he's a red teamer for CDW and he likes to eat egg noodles or something like that. So, but I'll let Tyler introduce himself and we'll just go ahead and get started.
This is me, Tyler Booth. I work as a senior information security consultant at CDW. Actually, in the crowd tonight are some of my coworkers and my manager, so don't make me look bad. The overall topic for this particular presentation is really a very cool story of a pen test that I had done myself against a local county government's police station, and it was also against the city hall and stuff too, but the police station stuff gets pretty interesting. So without further ado, this is my story on this police station pen test from zero access to the evidence room. So I do have a Who Am I slide, Rob. It's here. I'm Tyler Booth, Senior Information Security Consultant. I just told you that. I do have a cert, and I wrote a few blog posts on a currently defunct blog, so I guess that makes me an InfoSec expert at this point. I don't know if you guys can detect the sarcasm, but it's there. And I'm currently focusing my efforts running red team operations, developing our red team and purple team services here at CDW, and I also do some managing and automating of our team's attack infrastructure, and we also do some research here and there. This has nothing to do with any of that cool stuff. Instead, it's more of a story about a standard security assessment that our team typically conducts. So the overall background here is that I and my team at CDW was contracted to conduct what we call a comprehensive security assessment of this large county somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. Throw a dart at the map and maybe you'll land there. Who knows? This particular client wanted to focus on the county itself, as well as the local police force, which in some instances we've seen in the past they've been separate entities. But the police chief was very into the idea, and because of that, I did not get coal fired, I guess, if we use coal fire as a verb. Everyone signed off on everything, so everything I'm about to tell you was legal and did not get me in any trouble with the government. So this particular engagement focused on an external pen test. Anything that's exposed to the internet, we're testing. An internal pen test, so anything in the actual internal network, past that external perimeter where all the workstations and servers are, that was getting tested. There was a wireless security test, and then social engineering test, which contained, two elements. They wanted me to send some phishing emails, but they also wanted to know if I could convince somebody to let me into sensitive areas at two separate locations. My caveat here at the bottom of the slide is that I cannot cover my entire methodology throughout the course of this presentation from start to finish. So there might be gaps. But at the end of this, I'd like to open it up for a Q&A. So if you have any specific questions that I might be able to answer, I'd be more than happy to address it then. But I'm going to try and give you a lot of the high level methodology. I might get in the weeds a little bit. If it becomes too boring or tedious, someone stop me. But overall, I think we're going to have a pretty nice time. So I think like this slide's pretty boring because there's no pictures, right? But it kind of covers like the beginning processes of an external path to compromise. And like most pen testers and red teamers, we tend to follow, you know, project methodologies. You might see something like the cyber attack, like kill chain, or maybe you'll see like PTES, the penetration testing execution standard. Maybe you'll see MITRE ATT&CK, which does a pretty good job of like outlining some of the different attacks and where they might fit within an attacker's like, honestly, like the attack lifecycle in general. Most of us all start at the same spot, which is from nothing. And so we have to get a little bit of information about the client, about what type of business that they're conducting, who maybe their clients are, who works for them, what assets they might have as far as like what IP ranges do they have that they might own, what domain names they might own, what subdomains exist on these domains. So there's a lot of information that you kind of go out and you collect as much of it as you possibly can, and then you kind of ingest it and you know, use it for later on in the attack. So for me, when I'm conducting initial reconnaissance, I wanted to collect a list of employee email addresses and really their job titles, because I kind of want to know like what departments people are in. It helps inform my phishing campaigns. It helps inform really like what types of people I want to go after as I, you know, start to actually get a foothold in the environment. It's a local government. They have almost every employee published to the internet, so that wasn't too hard. Although, if you are struggling and you'd like, you know, to get some level of information as far as like a list of potential email addresses, hunter.io is a great resource. It'll even give you like the email address format. So like if that's not readily available to you or clear to you, it kind of uses some regex to determine whether or not like it's first initial last name or something like that. Yeah, it's pretty helpful. Even the free version of hunter.io gets you like at least like a page or two of results, so it's not too bad. I use this other tool called LinkedIn, which is pretty helpful. You basically create a sock puppet LinkedIn profile, go add a bunch of people all over the place, build up a series of connections, because the more connections that you have, the more profiles you can see on LinkedIn. And then you can specifically search for people that work at a company based on a company ID that you can find like in a URL or in like a web request somewhere. And then you can use that to like pull down a list of people's names from their profiles, and then it'll do some regex magic to convert them into an email address format that seems to coincide with what the client actually has. Your mileage may vary with this. I get a lot of false, you know, I guess we would maybe call them false positive results. There are things that you can do to try and validate these emails. You could probably like mass send them some BS email from a Google account you don't care about and just see like if you get any bounce backs or not. Or you could do like a timing attack against OA if they have like OA exposed to the internet. So it ultimately, you know, determines on your current situation. I also like to look at DNS subdomains and, you know, the client's IP ranges. So there's like a couple tools that I listed here. Sublister is a great tool. It checks like virus total, certificate transparency logs, DNS dumpster. There's like a whole bunch of resources that it kind of like checks these domains against, and then it'll return a list of possible subdomains. You can also use a tool like GoBuster, which has like a DNS like brute forcing module built into it. And then you can just like feed it like a list of common like DNS subdomains if you're like interested in maybe getting like a more complete list. I would say that typically with like Sublister or like AMAS or any other like DNS enumeration tool, It tends to be a little bit more accurate, I guess, because they almost always tend to return subdomains that actually have something on them. Whereas if you're just like a brute forcing a large list, you might get some hits, but it's like old legacy stuff that has long since died, or I don't know, a name server somewhere is like resolving stuff that might only exist on the internal network. You can't actually like hit it from the outside. So I got email addresses, right? Like, I know kind of what I want to do next. I want to try and obtain some type of key material. There's an attack that we conduct here. It's not novel. It's not like secret to us. It's a fairly common attack. And it's email based. We basically will send target users in a client's organization a blank email. Well, it looks blank. It's not though. Embedded in the HTML of the email is this image source tag that points at a malicious server that's running a responder. If anyone's like conducted a pen test or has been around when someone's conducted a pen test, you've probably heard of Responder. If you haven't heard of Responder, I didn't post a link here in the slides, but I guess like the short explanation of like how Responder kind of works is it allows you to respond to broadcast-based traffic like on a local network. But in some instances, it can also initiate like a challenge and response handshake between a client and the server that's running Responder, and then like pull out net NTLM credential material. So in this instance, when we embed this malicious image source tag into the HTML of the email, it's trying, the Outlook client, like the thick client, is trying to retrieve that image that is in this HTML tag. It doesn't exist like on the actual server. But because we use this UNC path, we're basically tricking the Outlook client to use SMB to communicate with the server over the internet, which is why you want to have like proper egress filtering in place to filter, SMB and CIFS out of your network, because typically that's not something you need to do to accomplish, day-to-day activities, right? You don't need to communicate to an SMB file share over the internet. So the idea here is that the Outlook client is going to try and retrieve this image, and the server will go, well, wait a second. If you want to see this image or access this resource, you have to prove that you have access to it. So it'll send a challenge to the client. The client will respond with their response, which typically has some key material that can then be taken offline and cracked using Hashcat or John the Ripper. You pick your poison. So I stole this screenshot from somebody else's blog post because I didn't have a screenshot readily available from this particular process that I had followed during this pen test. So it will look like this in the responder logs. You will get like the client's IP address, the client's username, and then this big long hash, this net NTLM v2 hash. And that's the hash that you want to get. You're going to try and, crack it offline. If you're lucky and it's a relatively easy password to crack, and I have a friend and a coworker here in the audience, like who's probably like cringing because he's a password cracking expert. So I'm sorry, Ian. I'm trying to explain this in the best way I know how, I guess. So if I use the wrong terminology, that's on me. The idea is that if this is not too crazy of a password, it shouldn't be too computationally expensive for you to try and crack it using some reasonable tactics for like generating like this key space and like testing it against the hash. If it's like a 12 or 14 character long password, or passphrase, even better, chances are it's probably not going to crack. And this hash is useless unless it's cracked. So there are some instances where you can like relay netntl mv2 hashes. That didn't happen here. I cracked the hash and I gained access to a user's email account. So this user did not have VPN access, did not have remote access of any kind. However, as I was digging through their email, which was an iterative process, I ended up finding a message about a database update from Anthony in IT. And Anthony in IT thought that it would be a great idea to screenshot the TeamViewer, the TeamViewer credentials, the ID and the password from this database server and send it to this user. This user, like they were in a position within the county where they basically did like vendor relations. So they had a vendor that needed access to the database because it's running some proprietary software that this vendor was, supporting. This user needed access to the TeamViewer credential so they could send it to the vendor and have the vendor log in and fix something. As you can see, I've redacted all of this. This kind of leads us to this kind of conundrum, right? Somebody here in IT, they didn't properly deliver these credentials out of band. So a lot of users don't always think of email as a very sensitive place. And you will find, as a pen tester, as a red teamer, or even as like a blue teamer who's like kind of digging into an incident, you're going to find tons of credentials in emails. I think that it is almost unavoidable. For whatever reason, people just think email is like a safe place to share sensitive information. And that is not always the case. So, if you guys manage your own, your own IT security apparatus, keep this in mind. You might want to create some policies for delivering credentials out of band, and hopefully, you're able to enforce that against your users. So I have these TeamViewer credentials. Can I log in? I can. And this is probably one of the easiest instances where I got domain admin ever, because TeamViewer was running as a domain administrator. I don't know why. I'm guessing the vendor somewhere told the people who worked at this county that their software needed to run with like administrative rights in the domain. And so IT said, okay, we'll just give you an account that has enterprise admin and domain admin access. So as soon as I logged into TeamViewer, I was granted domain administrative access. But I guess that's not where the story ends. It's nice to have domain admin. It's nice to have enterprise admin. It's not always required for us to accomplish our goals as attackers. Compromising a low-level user that has access to, I don't know, a spreadsheet filled with social security numbers is just as, I'm going to say something controversial. It's just as serious of an issue as somebody getting domain admin. It just depends on, what your end goal is and what type of impact you're trying to prevent from happening when an attacker inevitably compromises you. So it's always good to do all the lower level stuff too, such as like keeping clean spreadsheets and making sure there aren't like passwords or social security numbers and all the stuff stored in documents in the clear. But it's probably just as important as like implementing security controls, like the principle of least privilege, or following like Microsoft's tiered administration model. If this client followed Microsoft's guidelines, there would never have been a domain administrator logged into this random database server. It just wouldn't have happened. It would have been isolated to a domain controller where all domain admins should be forever and always. So moving past DA. Well, I'm a domain admin now, so I can do whatever I want in the domain. So this is me now iterating, sorry, not iterating, but this is me like now trying to like give you some intimate details on like why nothing is safe at this point that's domain joined. While I compromised the entire domain, I wanted to look at their database servers because I was already on one. What happens if I looked at some of the other ones? So I moved laterally from this database server and moved over to like a production SQL server that had some pretty interesting tables. There's this one table that was related to this product called Gardall, which I have seen in the past before. And one of my favorite things to do, it's like a signature of mine. Like if anyone was to develop like an indicator of compromise for my activities, this would be one of them. Like you could probably like create some threat intel profile for me just based off this. I love compromising physical access control systems. So this is a physical access control system that was in charge of all of the electronic locks indoors of the entire county, the entirety of the police station. The only things that were not protected by this system were doors where they still had to use regular old keys to like get inside of them. But like for the most part, like pretty much everything's being controlled by this physical access control system. So I thought that since I had a little bit of time, I'm still sitting like on my couch in the living room, haven't even gone anywhere, to do anything else. I thought, well, I'm just going to crack some of these passwords that are stored here in the SQL database, and then I'm just going to log into the access control system. So I did. I got administrative access to the access control system. As you can see in this screenshot, there's a lot of different things that you can do. For anybody who has managed a physical access control system, none of this looks too unfamiliar to you, but it should maybe be spooky that some guy in his living room is on your physical access control system. I created my own badge. I have a Proxmark. I have Proxmark 3 that I use for pen test work. You can use it for cloning cards, but if you have all of the necessary material for an access card, such as its card number, facility code, and everything's properly configured in a physical access control system, I've made that change. Somebody could, use a Proxmark to make a card at home and then stroll up to your building and use that physical credential to open up doors. Depending on, your policies, of course. So I went ahead and made a card here. They actually had an interesting role in this system. It was called God Mode. I think they had a role called God Mode, and they had another role called Master. And then there was another like little added role called like Plus Evidence. So some people had God Mode, but some people had God Mode plus Evidence. I'm assuming Evidence was like siloed off. It was its own thing in the access control system. And I thought, man, it'd be really cool if I could go into the evidence room. So I made a badge that could do that. And then I thought, well, now I got to do this physical social engineering thing. So this is where you get into the art of the pretext. Like when we're planning to infiltrate a building, we have to, really take into account like why are we there in the first place? Like what's our backstory? Like who are we? So sometimes it's easier just to use your real name instead of like coming up like a fake one. And then like you kind of like build your social engineering attacks around this pretext. So I knew from my initial reconnaissance that they were using a very specific telecom company that serviced the county and its E911 system, which seemed like a perfect way to get into restricted areas at a police station and also at the city hall building. So I wanted to look the part. I got on eBay. I found a telecom company work shirt that a lineman somewhere was like, I don't need this anymore. I don't work for telecom company A. So I'm just going to sell this shirt for like $10. I found an old tool belt, some work boots, a clipboard. I made a fake work order that had really bad math on it. I think if anyone would have looked at the final total, it said something like, I owe you $10 million. Like me, the individual, would owe the county $10 million, and no one ever looked at that. I think that's the best part. So chances are, if you got a little bit of time, you got a couple dollars, you can go to like Goodwill, eBay, somewhere, buy a uniform, look somewhat official. I'm not saying I look exactly like a telco lineman or anything. I'm just saying like a lot of normal people probably couldn't tell the difference. So this is me. I'm in my hotel room. I got my get up on. I thought, wow, I should take a picture and send this to my teammates. And so I did. So this is how this all ended. I showed up at the police station and I was waved in by the officers. They didn't put me through a metal detector. They didn't care to check my backpack, my tool belt. They didn't want to see like all the lockpicks and other stuff that I had in my bags. They're just like, oh, you work for telco company? Go on in and sit in the lobby. Eventually, an IT person is buzzed up to the lobby where I'm at, and he doesn't ask me my name or like what I'm here for. He leans in for a handshake and says, I know where to take you. And so he took me down into their phone room, and that's a picture of me on the right in the phone room. I was successful, and I felt like really good. So I decided to give myself a thumbs up. The picture under all the text on the slide is the E911 system. And there's a really funny thing about this. Because it's in the bowels of a police station, I guess they thought it was pretty safe. There's a big sticky note with an encryption password stuck to it. So you can decrypt all the records on the E911 system and, I don't know, delete them or something. It's probably not good. So shortly after I got into the phone room, I made my way unsupervised to a bunch of other places that were down there in the basement. And there was this one door that said evidence in big, bold letters. And this is where I had a change of heart. I took that badge that I made during the external portion of this assessment and I placed it on the card reader and it beeped and I heard the door click open. I did not go in that room because I realized that maybe, just maybe, if a person who is unauthorized goes into an evidence room, that might jeopardize the maybe a lot of cases attached to the evidence in the room. So then I thought, well, maybe I'm not going to go in there. So I didn't. There was another room called Armory. I tested the badge on that door. I didn't go in. I just heard the click. I felt pretty satisfied with that. And it's a good thing I didn't because there's an armed police officer that sits behind a desk there, and he probably would have shot me because I'm not a cop friend of his. So I literally maybe dodged a bullet there. Oh, sorry. I'm not ready yet. I left this police station. I got all my stuff, took all my pictures for evidence, walked out to the car in the parking lot, my rental car, hopped in it, drove to a second location, and did it all over again. No one cared. It's like I actually belonged. So there are probably some takeaways for defenders from this whole story, right? Well, you should probably filter traffic out of your network on egress. As I had mentioned, you don't need SMB and CIFS outbound to arbitrary IPs, right? If you implemented a more stringent password policy, even if this key material happened to have been compromised, it'll make it exponentially harder to crack offline. I would have given up. I would have looked for another way to get credentials at that point. You definitely shouldn't be sharing credentials through insecure channels, and that includes email. You know, find different out of band alternatives. Like if you have to go to somebody's desk and like hand them a piece of paper so they can like write out like type in a password and then you watch them rip it up or something, like that is much better than saying like, oh, I'm going to send you a screenshot of this remote access like credentials and send it to you over your email. In regards to like the internal testing and my lateral movement and the fact that there's a domain admin logged into some arbitrary server, use privileged access management, adhere to that tiered administration model. You shouldn't let your domain admins leave the domain controllers. You shouldn't let your server admin accounts like leave servers and go into workstations. You know, the idea is that like maybe you let a lower tier account have access to like maybe one thing higher, but you don't like take these higher tier accounts like a server admin or a domain admin and just let them log in wherever. Keep them separate, keep them siloed off. Also, just from the physical security side, you should probably vet folks who show up on site for quote unquote business. I didn't really have to try and like spin some yarn explaining like why I was there and what I was there to do. I just had a uniform on and a clipboard, and I said, "Hey, I'm here to look at the E911 system." One sentence is all I had to say. And then I get escorted down into a room and left alone. So I think that like if these people had a policy in place where they would have at least checked with their management before letting me wander around unattended, they probably would have been in a much better position. And these are just some like quick hit, like high level items. Like there's way more findings in the report itself, but I can't show you that because that is well, that's not ethical, I guess. And also, I don't want to talk to you guys for like 3 hours straight about a report that I wrote one time. It's pretty boring. So here we are. We're at my last slide, and you know, I wanted to kind of open this up for like the obligatory like Q&A with like the red teamer. I have coworkers here. They, I think, are welcome to answer questions or make any statements because we have a little bit of time left. So if you provide me questions, I would love to provide you answers. I really appreciate you guys for hanging out and just kind of listening to the presentation. And then I wanted to be funny when I read up this presentation, I guess. Is probably, you know, I was probably really delirious late at night. Don't forget to tip your waitress, I guess. And if you don't have a waitress, I guess you can give like, I don't know, your dog a kiss or something. I think also like, because I wanted to make sure that I was like representing CDW in some regard, as I told this really cool story, we do security assessments. No one knows that. Everyone thinks we just sell toner and stuff. Like we do a lot of really cool stuff. So that about does it. Does anyone have any like questions, comments, concerns, disappointments?
Hey Tyler, I have a question for you, man. So I have a 3-week assessment coming up on a similar local government. That like really almost the same pretext, basically, and premise of what you just walked over. And I noticed when you were talking about that particular software that you said you had ran into it several other times before. From a type like of like a line of business perspective for a local government, are there other applications that are similar to that that would be good to look out for when I get in? Because I don't think it's going to be an issue to get in, but to demonstrate that impact, knowing which applications to look for would be pretty awesome.
Yeah. So this is like one of those things. Like it's like we're like hunting for truffles sometimes when we're trying to find this stuff. The thing about like this particular piece of software is like they don't actually have like a website for it. Like I've only like found documentation like on these like weird fly-by-night like UK physical security sites. So I'm assuming there's like some vendor somewhere that these like local governments are using that just happens to have a relationship with a specific product set. Um, Obviously, you're going to look for stuff like HID, like anything HID. Kind of helps you like find at least products from that specific company. But I will say the people that you should target, like from a department-wise perspective, would be in one of three groups. HR, because they handle employee onboarding, and usually you'll find in some HR representative's email, like, hey, I gotta have like a key fob made, or I need a ID card or something made. If they don't make them themselves, facilities, because well, they're probably doing stuff with the physical locks and stuff too, so they might have a say in like the physical access control systems. I guess security, if they have like a dedicated like physical security team. Sometimes receptionists will have the physical access control software running on their workstation, and they're just checking like badges in and out of a specific area. And then like sometimes IT might be in charge of the physical access control system. It really is a toss-up. So I would like check those. I would check emails associated with people in each of those individual segments. The other thing that I would say is it is possible, like for some organizations, that they don't actually manage their own physical access control system because, like, I don't know, they rented out a couple floors in a high rise somewhere or something like that. At which case, that kind of becomes out of scope for your testing. So I'd be cognizant of that. And then you can like look at certain like SQL servers, and you might find something like you might find like card ID or facility code or door controller or certain terms that are associated with like physical access control systems. You can kind of search for, and then you can kind of use that to kind of guide yourself to the win. Does that make sense, Logan?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, man. And they're a pretty large local gov, so I think they'll have a lot of stuff in-house. So that's good advice. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries.
So one thing I'd add there, when it comes to reconnaissance for state and county governments, very often they have a regulatory requirement to post their contracts publicly on their procurement website. So it may be worth looking there for specific vendors.
Excellent. And a lot of times too, those documents, they may have PDF metadata in them that reveals Active Directory usernames, stuff like that as well. Always good to check.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm finding things like FOCA and stuff are like kind of like falling apart. Tools that I had used previously for scraping like metadata from documents and stuff. But some of the there's a lot of stuff on GitHub that still works. I think MetaGoofil still works and things like that. So
PyMeta
yeah.
does okay sometimes, depending on what it is.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments? There's a lot of us in here. There's like 25 people.
So, Tyler, when you were doing this, you were going through, I guess, you kind of started, like you said, on the couch, and then you kind of worked your way through. At what point did you feel like, okay, well, I went far enough from the pen test perspective? I mean, at what point do you transition from the pen test portion to the physical portion? Was it just after you got DA and you kind of just bounced around from there, or did you continue to demonstrate that you could further propagate yourself electronically rather than physically? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I think I have a pretty solid answer. So for our team, I'm not gonna say for our team in particular, but I am going to use this as like from my knowledge of what our team does from a methodology perspective. When we're conducting these types of engagements, we have a pretty holistic process. So as we're, obtaining information, we're obtaining like footholds and everything, we tend to just keep going, from phase to phase. So instead of like saying like, okay, like I did all the external stuff, I'm going to stop here. And then next week when I go on site, I'm going to pick up from the internal. Typically, if it's all in scope, we'll just keep going. At some point, our goals during our engagements, at least, will shift. So we kind of work through the pen test, like exploitation phase, up until like a certain point, and then we go, okay, well now we need to kind of try and find some root cause reasons why things are, well, I'm not gonna say like this bad or anything like that, but why things are insecure in its current configuration. That's when we kind of shift away from like pen testing and we shift more into almost like an auditing type perspective. Like we're gonna run vulnerability scans, that's common. And we'll run 2 different versions of vulnerability scans. We'll do like an unauthenticated vulnerability scan, like at the onset of like the internal test. Really just to kind of see what low-hanging fruit's out there. It might help us in obtaining DA, it might not. But then we'll do like an authenticated vulnerability scan where we start checking like patch levels across workstations and servers. We're doing a domain, like an Active Directory domain password audit, where we're pulling down all these credentials from Active Directory. We're cracking them on our cracking rig, and we're basically trying to generate metrics, like actual metrics that you can use as like actionable intel to make better like policy decisions. So if you have, a minimum password length of like 8 characters and you don't have complexity turned on in the domain, chances are a lot of passwords are probably going to crack just by virtue of like that particular policy. There are some other nuances. So the idea is that we're kind of demonstrating risk, like actively showing you what types of impacts exist with the pen test portion, but then we kind of follow up with this almost auditing style portion of the engagement to kind of show you, well, here's where policy and configuration changes are going to help mitigate these problems, if that makes sense. And I'm not sure for like everyone on our team, like when that switch gets flipped. Sometimes people are doing both pen testing and like auditing style activities like almost concurrently. Some people will focus on the pen test, like the exploitation activities, like pretty heavily, like at the forefront of the engagement. And then once they feel like they've proven a point or have followed like all of these like threads to like a reasonable degree, like you can't go over your hours or anything like that, right? The idea is that you then shift to some of these other activities to kind of make sure that you're really like driving home some like actionable like recommendations that people can use to actually like make changes in their environment to make them like more secure. Me just telling you a cool story about how I like hacked an organization and got DA is like a cool story, and I think it's cool to tell the story. But at the end of the day, when you get a pen test report, you don't want to know how badass the hackers are. You want to know what can you do to get better. So that's why we have to make that shift. And so if we feel like we followed these threads to like a really good conclusion, we've really demonstrated like the impact to a business, then at that point we need to kind of shift that focus and give people something a little bit more substantial than a really good story.
So I'm going to follow on to that. So that's exactly where I was going. So I'm assuming that consistently you see the same things rear their ugly heads pretty commonly. Does that make sense? So without going into too much detail or without going too long, because I don't want to keep you here all night, but can you give us just maybe from a blue team perspective, what are the top 5 things that you see most commonly? Could you do that?
Yeah, I think. I mean, if you don't mind, because I have a couple of my cohorts on here, I think it could be like popcorn it. You know, like
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. Okay, so I'll say one. I have Yayati on here. He's a guy on our team. I have Ian on here. He's a guy on our team. And we'll just kind of see what they think. Um, I would say one of the things that I see pretty consistently is lack of like privilege separation, uh, and, um, and that could be like from a tiered administration model, which is what's Microsoft and other organizations typically recommend. So I'll see a lot of like IT administrators who have admin level privileges assigned to their normal user account. And sometimes I'll see, like, this is just tangential to that. Sometimes I'll see where they have separate admin accounts, but they share the same password across these different accounts. Um, uh, Yayati, if I could like call on you, do you have, are you here? Oh no, my popcorn idea is not going to work. What about Ian?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you, Yayati.
Oh, I
Hey,
was
this
double
this is
muted. Sorry about that.
yeah, no worries.
So yeah, I would say from my perspective, I like to go after multi-factor authentication a lot. And from the blue team perspective, there are some misconfigurations or just some protocols or some applications that get missed. An example of that would be with Office 365. You do have multi-factor authentication that's enabled, but you leave, or if you don't pay attention to the Exchange Web Services or the EWS endpoint, that just leads, you can actually bypass it because you cannot protect EWS with MFA, and that's how you would get access to email even if users had authentication or like authenticator app or something of that sort enabled. The other thing that I see with MFA is, for example, for a Citrix portal, you will have Citrix and you will have MFA on the Citrix page. But then if you try and access Citrix, for example, using like a device which is not a computer, I would say, when I say computer, a host, but you use like a cell phone or you have an Android emulation software such as BlueStacks and you're using that to access it, I have seen instances where MFA is bypassed and you still are able to get internal access. So misconfiguration on protocols and incorrect or insufficient monitoring on MFA endpoints would be one such vulnerability.
Thanks. That was worth the price of admission right there.
Yeah. We've seen a couple weird MFA bypasses for certain. So I guess just be cognizant of what endpoints are associated with like a certain like application that you're using. I've even seen not ways necessarily like bypass like MFA in a traditional sense, but with the ADFS protocol, I've seen some exposed endpoints that allow you to do password spraying without locking out an account. So that's pretty interesting. Um, Ian, do you have anything that you'd want to share with everybody here, if you're free to talk?
Yeah, sure. I mean, hi everybody. My name is Ian. This is kind of a boring one, but honestly, again, we see it so often, and it's so often a kind of a important part of our initial access. Is simply, like privilege hygiene on, unprivileged users on workstations throughout the environment. Like a handful of users, or like even just like one user being granted local admin rights on their own workstation. Is often a way for us to, just like one hypothetical scenario would be, let's say we use elementary password spraying in order to gain a single credential we're on the inside of the environment. We now have a domain credential that we can use to obtain a full list of the machines in the environment. So we then go and attempt to log in, with that user to all of the domain joined systems. If we can even find, one system where that user has local admin rights, we can then hop onto that system, start doing post-exploitation tasks, and oftentimes that'll result in something as relatively simple as being able to pull the local administrator's password hash. And oftentimes, especially in an environment where they're just imaging workstations, or using a script to configure them, most, if not all, of the workstations in the environment will have the exact same local administrator credential. So that's a really easy and quick way for us to go from having no access to having local administrator rights on 500 workstations, which usually ends up getting us somewhere else pretty quickly.
Yeah, so, and that just brings up a great conversation about LAPS or some other password solution, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much our constant suggestion for that particular issue.
I've got a question. So you were talking about, some, performing the steps, like going through the pen test and then performing the, the audit, right? The vulnerability scan, and, to get the results and remediation. Have you all ever come across, you've gone through the pen test, your report shows that you've exploited XYZ to get to, ABC. But then after that, you find that when you ran a vulnerability scan or something that maybe they had fixed those findings. Do you guys ever come back to do the validation or anything of that nature to show that, hey, well, you exploited this, but, we fixed it, probably right after you did your pen test?
Yeah. So I guess I would say there have been instances during the test, at least for a couple of us here, where we tell our point of contact at the client, hey, we noticed that you have SMB signing, you're not enforcing SMB signing on 1,000 machines, and then someone somehow somewhere they decide that they're gonna go ahead and fix it. If they fix something, which by the way, I'm not saying you should do that without proper testing. I'm just saying as an example. So I apologize if that's a terrible example. But let's just say we present them this finding. While we're still doing the test, they decide they want to go fix it. It's common for us to just revalidate that while we're there on the spot. And we can kind of update the report to kind of reflect that changes have been made and fixes have been implemented. We do retesting in some instances. If that's something that the client really wants, we can come back and validate a couple findings or validate findings that they want us to validate, and then we can just update the report and say oh, at such and such day, we conducted a retest and we found that this finding has this vulnerability has been remediated. So it is something that we've done in a couple different a couple different configurations. So it's not too crazy.
I could keep going all night, but I'm not going to do that. Does anybody else have any questions? Because I would, me personally, I could stay here all night and just have great conversations about this stuff. I love it, but I really understand that people probably want to get to dinner or they have other lives. But does anybody else have any questions? Because this is good stuff.
I've got another question. It's really geared towards if what do you normally recommend to students or somebody who's trying to get into the field and they want to they hear stories of pen testers getting in and going through these rules of engagement and just doing some awesome stuff and helping out the organizations that they're doing this work for. What are some of the what are your go-tos for somebody that says, hey, I'm trying to get into that field. What should I do to boost my current skills so I can at least start to get into that field?
Yeah. Yeah, Doug. I get this question a lot. I think as like hackers, like all of us get this question a lot. So everyone's path is different to like, ultimately like get to where they want to go. Like some people go to college, some people do like internships. Some people have just been hacking for like a really long time because they were curious and they're kind of troublemakers, right? I would say, since you're in school, if you have the opportunity to take like any courses, particularly related to like information security, since that's becoming pretty hot right now, absolutely do it. Find a group of people, like do some like CTFs, like maybe work on like Hack the Box, or find like a CTF that is currently being ran, like CTF Time, I think .com or .org, I can't remember. You have to Google it. They have a list of like ongoing CTFs that you could participate in. Come to meetings like this, like these like Rise meetings, and I think like ultimately, like as far as like you breaking into the career field, heavily consider what it is that you actually want to do, because like I've met so many people who like really wanted to be a pen tester, and then they thought, wow, this is kind of boring, I want to do something else, I want to work on the blue team, or I want to be like an application security engineer and like just write secure code or something. So like I think pretty seriously about what it is that you want to accomplish and like where you want to go with your career, and then be on the lookout for some like work opportunities, I guess. I don't want to keep people for like too much longer, but here at CDW, I started out at in an entry level position through what's called like it's called the associate program here. I basically came in, as a super green guy. They like put me through my paces for about 18 months. I took a bunch of curriculum, took some exams, shadowed a bunch of gigs, started leading my own gigs, leading my own engagements. And eventually, like, I'm now a senior engineer on our team, and I get to do like a ton of like really cool stuff. There are other companies that have a similar like process for people who are interested in getting invested and involved in the career path. Rapid7 has something similar. I think Optiv has something similar. You can find an entry level position at some of these like pen testing consulting firms that will like put you through your paces for a probationary period, and then by the end of it, you kind of get to say like, okay, I'm going to do this for real, and they'll give you an actual like full-time position. I mean, you're working a full-time position anyway, but like they're actually going to give you like a title, right? So instead of being an associate or an analyst or something, you actually become a consulting engineer, right? So just be on the lookout for opportunities like that. We do that every so often. We'll hire like one or two like new associates. If you like look for like CDW associate program or something like that, like you probably see if there's like any open like recs, and like Rob mentioned at the beginning, I guess if we have like any open positions, I'd be more than happy to like kind of share that when they kind of like open up, and then you guys can maybe like try an interview if you're really interested. And segueing real quick, Doug, I'm sorry. Andy in the chat was asking if we should go after any certs. I think that's up to you. Like if you look at job postings, like you'll see like HR. Yeah, there you go, Sean. Sean works with me, by the way. Yeah, a lot of people will have like HR requirements for specific certifications, but just because you have a certificate doesn't necessarily mean that you know what you're doing, right? So sometimes it's helpful to bypass HR filtering. And other times, like it does give you like new knowledge that maybe you didn't possess, but I wouldn't like invest a bunch of money in certs unless you absolutely needed to like get a job. And I think there's like one more question. This might be more for Rob then. Are there more of these cybersecurity oriented events in the Roanoke area?
Yeah, I saw that, and I will comment on that. So there's the RBTC There's also a Linux users group, which I think would be super helpful in regards to doing red team or blue teaming for that matter. I think, who runs that group? It escapes me now. Daryl Little. Good Lord, he runs everything in Roanoke. So Daryl Little runs that group. Feel free to send a message to info at RoanokeInfoSec.com. If you send me an email, I'll respond and kind of elaborate on that. But there's several different groups. There may not all be cybersecurity related, but we definitely have some information or information technology related groups around. And I'll just kind of sum it up with this. We get asked in the RISE group a lot about that very same question. What's the best way to get into cybersecurity? And it really, I think, in my opinion, it is where you're at. So like I came from doing systems administration, network administration, and then kind of did some DoD work and then fell into the security thing because of all of my past experiences with all those other types of environments, network administration and what have you. So it's just kind of where you're at and just apply the skill sets that you have. And as an up and coming person, like Tyler said, trying to get some of those skill sets early always helps. But if anybody has any more questions or if there anything we didn't cover, feel free to reach out to info at RoanokeInfoSec.com. It's the same email address that you got the invite from. And we'll be happy to try to get Tyler those questions and have him respond. Or if Tyler's okay with it, you can certainly speak with him directly via email or whatever his preferred communication channel is. So, but with that, I think we're going to be done unless you have something else, Tyler.
No, sir. I think I'm about ready for dinner myself. Thank all of y'all for coming. I really appreciate it, and you guys stay safe out there and have a good weekend.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Again, be sending out something for the December meeting. I'm not sure what it'll be yet, but it'll probably be just as cool as this. Probably not. But in any case, we'll have something, and hopefully everybody has a great weekend. Thank you for everybody for attending. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.